Subscribe to Need to Know for the CEO podcast, and you will get to listen to and be inspired by other CEOs as they share their experiences and best practices. You'll also get to listen to subject matter experts who will brief you on what they think you need to know to do your job more effectively. The experts will occasionally include Ian and I, who will do episodes on topics like creating a winning strategy, OKR best practices, maturing metric capabilities, and building a high-performance culture, and other business news-related topics. Enjoy the show. Hi, Ian. So we're here to talk about strategy today, and I think in particular strategy as it relates to OKRs. And I think what would be really useful is if we share the different starting points that leaders come to us with in relation to strategy, because it is an area that's highly variable between different companies, and particularly as they also go through different growth stages.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Really interesting topic. And as someone who probably considers themselves a strategist, close to my heart, and I think one of the things that's really interesting about strategy is there's often a big difference between where people think they are in terms of strategic maturity and where they really are. Often people say we've got a really strong strategy. When you dig into it, it doesn't kind of tick the key boxes. So just kind of running through some of the starting points that we see. And this is really the way we perceive it, not necessarily, what they would say. So first of all, is the zero state, which is they have no strategy that they can articulate to hand, and often they want to change that. They realize that's the gap. And occasionally you see organizations who are happy without a strategy and just want to adapt and be reactive, but generally speaking, zero state but want to change it. Then there's the organizations who have a strategy but recognize that it needs improvement. It's not achieving what they want. Maybe they're doing okay, and it has weaknesses that we'd identify. We've got this strategic assessment tool, which I think is really powerful for potential clients to look through. They would show up in that assessment, and the client kind of sees that and wants to improve. Then there's a kind of corollary to that, which is there's a strategy exists, and examples of seeing that is where maybe the C-suite have been talking about key priorities and key challenges, but they haven't really articulated it, and they realize that isn't really sustainable. They can't be in every single discussion. So they realize as they grow, they need to keep everybody aligned, which means formalizing the strategy a bit, quite a bit more. And to some degree, it means maybe that the strategy isn't changing as much, but because you can adapt really quickly when you're in a small group. But ultimately, they realize strategy needs to be owned by everyone and certainly needs to be understood by everyone. And that's kind of really, really close related to where you have a strategy but isn't communicated. And honestly, looking back on my career, early on as a strategist in an ivory tower where I'd write a strategy in a group, would be very proud of the work we did. And maybe we'd send out a document. This is so long ago, it was before every strategy deck was in PowerPoint. And that we'd think our job was done, and we'd go back and we'd work on next year's strategy or the next 6 month strategy. And no one else really knew what it was. People can't share it back. Where there was any understanding, there was huge amounts of signal loss between levels of the organization. And it really, to any practical purposes, wasn't being followed as a strategy. It was kind of separate to the operations of the business, which kind of it tells you a little bit the way that the domain has matured over the last X number of years. And then there's kind of a bit more honesty, I think, where you've got this idea that the strategy isn't really helping organizations achieve what they want to do. Maybe they had something that we'd identify as a strategy, but it isn't really working. They want to, rewrite it, rethink it. And in the context of OKRs, which we talk about a lot, strategy is there as a relay to OKRs. It's very difficult to write OKRs without a strategy. It's hard to think what's next. It's hard to track progress against a strategy without OKRs. So it's that symbiotic relationship. I mean, those are kind of some of the key starting points we feel from organizations. And also there's this kind of, isn't necessarily talking about the strategy, but companies who've kind of survived, prospered, done okay recently, but they kind of feel that where they've survived challenges, it isn't repeatable. They've stumbled their way through. And what they really want to have is a strategy they can turn to and say, yeah, okay, this is our expectation for the future. This is how we're going to win. I think that's a good point for me to drop in my definition of strategy, my one-liner, which is it's an evolving view of how we'll win. They want that. They want to be able to point back to something. And I think in a sense, those are the easiest organizations to work with because they've already grasped the concept of strategy. They just don't think they have a great one yet. Just wondered if any of that resonates with you. Those are the kind of things that, you've seen and you see too.
Yeah, I think when we see customers come in on kind of the OKR requirements ticket saying we want to implement OKRs, and I think it's obviously we ask them about strategy at that point, and you do see those variable starting points, and I think it's very easy at that point for the people we're talking to think that if we have to do strategy, that's suddenly made it a huge job. It seems, and that perception that it's a multi-week job that's done in January in some kind of offsite, and it's going to take all of my time and it's going to slow the business up is one of the things I see as well. And actually, as you're going through that, the reality is very different. And I think there's a number of things in how we could sort of challenge that reality. The reality is it doesn't need to be done in January. It doesn't need to take a long time, and it doesn't need to change every year if it's a really good one. Massively, it should be adapted through time. It is a hypothesis, therefore we can challenge it at any point if it's not going to work. And often what we see is people have the knowledge in the business already. Their starting point isn't the zero state. And with some good facilitation, they can actually move to a point where they can articulate how they're going to win at any one moment in time. And that has massive implications for OKRs, metrics, and other parts of the organization. And I think your point around, is that strategy well known within the business is an interesting one as well. I think what we're looking for is high levels of awareness of the strategy. And with awareness becomes your ability to accurately recall the strategy at different levels of the company. And the more it can be accurately recalled, then the more likely people are going to align with it. So I think that they're kind of the key sort of perspectives from my point of view. And I think, you mentioned the strategy assessment tool that we created together, which is available on our website for free, and anyone can just use the sliders to get a view. I thought it might be useful if we sort of take people through, those different questions that we chose to ask within that assessment and why we chose them. Are you up for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. I just wanted to pick on one thing which you said was really important there, and I've often talked as a former ivory tower strategist about strategy myths and this idea that it is a kind of something that takes months and is done by a few. In a smaller organization, you can create a useful strategy in days. It's not weeks or months. And I think just people need to feel that they can own and they can write a strategy. The kind of thought processes involved in strategy, people are using those kind of techniques all the time. They just need this kind of confidence that to bring them to the next level, to make them strategic decisions. So yeah, I think great points about it being much easier than people think. So coming back to the assessment, I think we've got 7 questions. Is that right in our assessment?
Yeah, we do. We managed to boil it down to 7. I think they're the key questions to reconsider. And I think if you are a leader listening to this, then these are the things we can perhaps debate. And so if I kick that off and with one of my favorites, which is really about understanding who your target customer is. And your target customer has many names. Sometimes it's ideal customer, and they can live in segments as well. But the idea that you really know who you're trying to serve better than your competition and what value they are looking for or looking to buy from you that they are willing to pay for. And if you can dig into that and you can really get under the skin of what your buyers need, what their alternate choices are, who they might choose to buy from or not buy from as a result of understanding that value exchange, then what follows in the conversations is going to go incredibly well. Now, teams often want to skip this stage when you're working through this. You can keep people in the zone of the customer for the right amount of time when we're facilitating these sessions, then that always ends well for the idea of having that sort of winning advantage that you talk about. So, we talk about a non-specific customer and a very specific customer, and all the sort of different degrees of in between there, and that's a critical first step for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting, it's the first time, and we'll cover this a bit later as well, is where you have to start making choices. And it's natural for a business to think, okay, let's try and aim at a very, very big pond or a very big pool, because there are more customers there. And it's absolutely true that your target addressable market is much bigger if you have a vague customer definition. But it becomes much, much harder to solve those customers' problems when you're very, very generic about them. And there are various aspects to that. What I would include in this customer definition, you've got the stuff we think about from a marketing perspective, demographics and this idea of target personas, but you want to get very specific about what's the problem you're solving for the customer.
Of course.
And that's a really critical thing you need to understand as an organization. And it can be tough to really understand what problem you're solving. So the more specific you get about that, the more advantage you can create. And I think that's really, to me, the customer is the foundation of your strategy. Knowing who you're serving is the most important thing, which I think maybe leads us into our second point, which is, I talk about specific customer being important because you can learn more about them and you can understand how to solve their problems better. And that leads us into this confidence in their advantage. Are we confident we can create and build a persistent and significant advantage to our competitors? Is the way that the customer will solve their problem with our product or service that much better than anyone else's? Is our value creation ahead of them? And having real confidence in that is a great strategic sign.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think that just play that sort of logic cascade out. So we've understood our customer, we understand the jobs that they need to do, or the pain points we need to solve, or how we need to make them feel as a result of kind of choosing us. We have narrowed it down to being highly specific there. That means that we have this proposed or actual competitive advantage. So we're looking for a big advantage as opposed to being kind of in that sort of attritional warfare of me too. And that then makes life much easier. That makes it easier for the customer to choose you. It makes it easier for salespeople to sell what you sell. It makes it easy to articulate your point of difference. And I think these are all very difficult things to do without that high degree of focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are other terms that people will hear, such as a moat. It's not just about creating an advantage over your competitors. It's also about being able to maintain that. Yeah. And how difficult is it for someone to replicate what you bring as a product? And you think about, one of the things that Apple do is have the very integrated ecosystem where you've got everything from your HomePod to your watch, your Apple TV, etc., let alone phones. Yeah. And to break that, there's a very, very high barrier to get over. So you need to build an advantage, but you need to maintain it as well. Look at someone like Microsoft again. If you look at the Office 365, the offering there. It's the breadth there. Yes, maybe someone can do something slightly better than Word, but can you beat Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Teams
Yeah.
as a one-stop package?
Yeah.
Really high bar, really difficult moats across.
Yeah.
And if you can create something like that and maintain it, yeah, you're well on the way.
And one of my sayings that I've borrowed is, if there's no difference, there's only indifference. And I think, that's what you're highlighting there, the difference being that you're part of a big ecosystem and makes life easy. It's all fully integrated is just one approach to that, but actually trying to pinpoint that is part of the essence of good strategy for sure.
Yeah, and I think being able to solve a slightly different problem to the competition. As you know, I've been rereading No Bullshit Strategy, and it makes the point that really a great strategy means that you don't have competition, that you're solving a slightly different problem. And we've talked about NVIDIA recently, and what they've done, they've gone further up the food chain. They're not just making GPUs for clients; they're helping them solve a higher order problem, which at the starting point nobody else was doing. So that's the best kind of advantage when you really aren't competing with anyone. You're providing something slightly different to everyone else.
Yeah, to marginalize competition is a great sort of checksum when you actually get to the end of your strategy and be able to articulate it in your narrative. Is are we going to marginalize our competitors? Are our sales guys going to be able to kind of articulate this key point of difference that customers clearly will value? That's one of the key yardsticks that you get to at the end.
So, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think the next thing is about sort of being able to move beyond that sort of understanding of the customer and your point of difference. And really, when you then go introspective, you've got to be able to pinpoint the key challenges and opportunities that you're faced in order to deliver that value and that point of difference. And you've got to make sure that you've addressed them effectively. Can you take us through kind of your thinking on that?
Yeah. So talking about another famous book on the topic, Richard Rummel, and his book, particularly The Crux. And what I love about The Crux is it really boils down to thinking about strategy, and it makes you concentrate on the hardest area to solve. In old language, we'd call it the biggest risk. Yeah. What's that biggest risk of success? And identifying that and being really honest and mindful about that is a difficult but crucial thing that lots of organizations don't do. So we've got a view of how we're going to be better. What do we need to actually get there? What do we need to do? Do we need to build a product which solves the problem in a particular way, or do we need to provide a level of service that nobody else can maintain? Do we need to improve even the culture of our organization? Yep. Is it about understanding the customer problem so deeply through great research and discovery? So when we identify the crux, it really tells us this is where you really start to focus on, okay, what do we really need to solve to be strategically successful? And this is where I start to think about a little bit about the adaptive nature of good strategy, because like any idea, strategic ideas, they're not all going to work. Some things are not going to achieve what you expect them to. And it's great to kind of spend some time, what-ifing. Okay, if this approach to the solution is not going to work, what other ideas do we have to be strategically successful? So this idea of the crux, I think, is right at the core. And this is also a view that evolves. So over the course of a year, how you view your crux will change. You'll overcome some of those hurdles, which will mean the crux is slightly different. And being mindful of what's our biggest challenge at all times is a great element of strategic thinking.
It's one of my favorite areas of workshopping, actually. I mean, I love that along with the customer. I love digging into the customer and the value. And I also love digging into this idea of the challenges and opportunities that are being faced, not just with the what the executive team knows, but actually digging into and accessing knowledge within the business, and how you can then try and look for patterns and themes within those that speak to you as a leadership team about the best path forward. And as you said, get to the real sort of crux of what is the most important and biggest issue at hand. And I think it's a really interesting body of work. Again, that shouldn't be limited to just the leadership team. We should try and access as much information as we can at that point without putting the brakes on. So, when people probably hear that, probably think, well, that's going to take us time, right? It doesn't have to take that much time. That information and knowledge is everywhere within the business. And if we can access it from all over the org chart, then the likelihood is we will increase our confidence that we really have pinpointed what the issues and opportunities are, and we can address them. And then with some level of prioritization, which then brings us on to one of your favorite sort of indications or indicators of maturity, which is this ability to not just pick up and prioritize things, but more importantly, discount or put things on the back burner.
Yeah, this one comes from probably my favorite quote about strategy, if not the most famous, from Michael Porter, which is the essence of strategy is what you say no to. And I think it's just in human nature, we like to keep our paths and options open. We like to think, okay, we look forward, we can see 10 different routes. We don't want to actually close off particular routes. And actually, the reality is in an organization that maturity comes from that ability to focus and to say, we're going to go after this route. We're going to go hard at that. We're not going to hedge our bets at the moment. We're going to focus on doing this. Now, that's not to say you're not open to signals that you may be wrong and you need to change path. But when we try and do one thing, it's so much more effective than if we try to do five. And it's interesting because we kind of inherently know as individuals and small teams, when we're working on 3 or 4 different things, there's all this context switching. There's waiting for other people to finish what they're doing, or maybe on another project to be able to contribute to what we're doing. And this absolutely is the case at organizational level as well. The ability to focus and the reality is you're going to be saying no to some really great ideas. There's things that are really exciting to you that seem like a big opportunity. But if you try to approach those with 4 other things at once, you're not going to make progress on any of them. So it is really, really hard. It's a bit of FOMO. I think about one organization I worked in not so long ago, where it was such a group of intelligent people. There were great ideas coming out left, right, and center. The biggest problem we had, and we didn't really nail it, was actually saying, great idea, let's put it in the parking lot. If our primary focus doesn't work out, we'll come back to it. We never got good at that. We continually tried to go forward on too many paths.
Yeah. And that's why you need a system and a process for scoring and discounting. And you also need to be able to assess your capabilities, resource, time, money when approaching this. And you shouldn't be scared of putting things on the backlog. It's okay to just keep it there. It's not going anywhere. The idea is not lost, and we don't. There's lots of things we can do to drive value creation, but those things can just come later. And that ability to work more in serial and parallel is one of the sort of key maturity traits that we look for. So I think that they're core kind of management skills that we hopefully are pretty good at coaching in.
Yeah, and linking it back to our assessment, that question we ask is, are there things you've been saying no to? Have you been actively rejecting, from face your good ideas? And it's a great question, because I think in many organizations they'll say, oh no, we haven't done enough of that.
So the next question I think we covered on the intro actually, which is that ability to increase awareness and have accuracy of recall of what the strategy is, and also be able to explain to anybody what you are doing to support it. Now, when you can do that at an org-wide level, then alignment wouldn't come as a surprise. When you can't do that, then misalignment is probably highly predictable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and this is really something that is much trickier than people realize. And I've learned the hard way, where you feel, okay, I've written a strategy and now everyone understands it. In fact, I remember an SVP, an organization not so long ago, who would repeatedly tell me that they had a strategy. And I didn't disagree with her, but the fact is that nobody else in her organization could tell her what that was. She got frustrated because, well, it's clear, we know what we're doing, but no one else really did. And I don't remember, we had a chat quite recently with a founder who said, he had to repeat this stuff 7 times. And that's not because the people in his organization are not listening or not mindful, but the reality is, for important messages, you have to repeat them multiple times, and also in multiple ways. We don't all learn the same way. I might hear it well in a town hall and really pick up it and go with it. Other people might see it on posters on the walls, or in a one-to-one with their leader, or in team discussions. You need to find multiple ways and multiple channels to get this message into your organization. It's really, really critical.
And so we spend a lot of time taking probably poorly articulated strategies, but not necessarily a bad strategy, and helping leaders articulate it in a better way, in a more concise way, in a way that can be remembered and understood. And that's often one of the battles. Is it's a great strategy has been hidden amongst complication. Too many words, too many pages, too much jargon. So the ability to be able to tell the story of your strategy is part of a narrative, and as you said, in multiple ways, and do that in a way that's reinforced, but also do that in a way that is in different formats. So, for example, we often use KPI trees or metric trees in order to develop that kind of measurement competency. And strategy needs a scorecard. It also needs metrics. So if we can, for some people, seeing strategy in the form of metrics and the relationships between different levers that will result in the strategy being executed, is a more desirable format than the storytelling version. And being able to say it in multiple ways, and then be able to use even techniques like rhetoric and to reinforce this, and to actually communicate and coach even managers at the lower levels, and give them the skills they need to keep on reiterating where we're focusing, how we're going to win, what we're trying to win, why we're here. And if we can just make that part of kind of our everyday processes and rituals, then again, we are constantly aligning and realigning wherever we can.
Yeah, I think you've taken us on to our next assessment question, which is a really powerful one, which is this idea of how mature an organization is with metrics. And I think of a lot of the stuff we've talked about in strategy is kind of narrative form, about thoughts, opinions, beliefs. What metrics do is they bring a structure to it. And just taking one example there, when we're talking about the crux, when we think about a crux, we probably think about how we're going to measure that, how we measure progress against that challenge. And what metrics start to do for us, they create this, I won't call it science, because all models are wrong. Some models are useful. It's an absolutely great adage. But what it does, it gives us a kind of a way of checking, another model to check our narrative against. And what really great metrics models do is they help us identify what I would call strategic levers. What are the things we can do in an organization to have the strategic impact we make? And we can start to, with the right tooling and with the right data, we can start to even, measure that impact. And the term we use in OKRs is this idea of the leading metric. These are things that we can move or influence in a relatively short time frame, such as the quarter of a typical OKR cadence, which connect to business and customer impacts and customer success. So I think this whole idea of the metrics model as an integral part of a strategy is growing. I think it's critical, and I think it's one of the primary indicators of real maturity for me. I think it's something that we work with all of our clients. It's never not part of the discussion. And having this metrics model you keep updated, you refer to, you use it, and let's face it, it's a huge part of OKR decision making. When you're thinking about, okay, what levers have we got for the next quarter? What progress can we make? Referencing that back to a metrics model is so much easier than kind of standing in front of a blank piece of paper and thinking, okay, what next? So yeah, this is massive for me.
Just as you're saying that, I'm laughing to myself because you're making me think about probably the last two customers that have chosen us to help them. And both of their journeys started with the book Measure What Matters, which is an OKR book. Yet so few people realize that in order to measure what matters, you need to start measuring what matters. And in the context of OKRs, it really doesn't, that book doesn't really go into the importance of having this capability. And it's no surprise that due date OKRs, whether they're projects or tasks, kind of the default for many people, and it is linked to this maturity. So this ability to evolve your metric capabilities in a way where every team is basically brought up to speed and has a level of maturity doesn't just have implications for strategy and how we deliver it. It has implications for managing the business as usual. It has implications for OKRs on the quality of OKRs. It also has implications for deriving purpose or onboarding new staff, amongst other things. So I think it's a really big, undervalued and underappreciated area as it pertains to both strategy, OKRs, and business in general. And it's something that I think we would always coach any leaders to take more seriously than perhaps they do. What I'd also say is, although it feels like a big nut to crack or a big project, inside 90 days, you can get a very long way, is what our experience is.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I really love about the kind of picture you just built there is that it connects the narrative and the metrics. And I find when organizations are using project milestones and features instead of outcomes for OKRs, what's missing is the connecting narrative. Because what they really need to do is, okay, why are we doing this? How does that connect to our strategy? That's one half of the question. So you connect to the narrative, and then you've got, okay, how do we measure progress against that? And if you can answer those two questions and start there rather than with what are we going to build, you start to build that narrative. And this, I think someone once described to me as a steel thread between here's the strategic narrative at the top of the organization, and here's me building this feature. How do you can create that connection. It's incredibly powerful. It gives purpose, it helps people engage, and it helps make sure you're working on something that's going to make a difference.
Absolutely. Which then sort of leads us nicely on to kind of the last question that we kind of cemented into our strategy assessment tool, which is to do with confidence. And how confident are you that your strategy results in you achieving your stated aims or commitments? And your aims and commitments could be moving towards your vision or achieving your vision. It could be achieving your budgets and forecasts for the year. But ultimately, it's about growth. And that level of confidence we're working on a strategy that we're not really that confident in, and we don't believe we're going to make the progress we want to. I'm very confident, and all of the different stages in between. That's really big. And what surprises us is how many times people have a strategy that they're not very confident in, yet they carry on using it and applying it.
Yeah, it's just being able to answer that question in itself is tricky for organizations, and it needs quite a bit of self-awareness, and honestly, I think about strategies I've written. I wasn't always incredibly confident that they would work, but I guess to my credit, I did understand. Okay, some of these cruxes we've identified are really hard. There's a big win at the end of them, but it's not a given that we're going to succeed. Where I think I worry more in a sense, ironically, given the question, is when people are highly confident their strategy is going to work, sometimes that's actually not a good sign, because it may be that they've missed some big challenges, or they've underestimated competition, or how uncertain and changeable the world is. So yeah, there are two ends. There's overconfidence, and there's confidence based on really great strategic groundwork, and they're not obviously not the same thing.
I think overconfidence, if you've got the data as well to support that, is not necessarily a bad thing. So it's you know, there's pretty nuance in that, but I think generally that's absolutely true. So I think what we've done is we've painted a very rational picture of strategy. We've talked about value, customers, and obviously when we're coaching and following the processes that we've developed, that includes, you know, looking at things like segments, competitors, the hardest part of what you need to solve for, the crux, what you're being throttled by, for example. We then can move towards areas like, you know, what does winning look like? And I think the concept of winning is really powerful. And that then leads into, you know, this ability to develop capabilities and then bring people along for the ride and prioritize and all those kind of good things. So we have a process that is very rational, that is relatively quick to sort of execute. Things can be done in days, and that's all great. What I'd love to talk about next is kind of how strategy feels as opposed to what strategy is. And I think this is a real sort of passion area for me, because I think mood, emotions, confidence, optimism are the things we don't talk about in the context of strategy. Every strategy book really talks about the how, the logic, the sequence, the exercises that you will need to do. But for me, as somebody that's been around this area for a bit, what's amazing is, if I just take the leadership team for a start, when you have a strategy, the burden of leadership is way less. You know that the thing that you've been brought on board to do is something that is achievable and you're likely to succeed. And that then is highly likely to make the role of CEO, COO, etc. way more fun. It's going to, you know, and you're not, this isn't meant to be, you know, or leadership in general does not have to be a burden that you have to carry and a terrible job that's full of stress and anxiety. I think you can relieve that with elements like strategy, and you can have feelings like, I feel like I'm developing, you know, or delivering against my role. I have confidence in where we're going. I have confidence we can beat the competition or outmaneuver them. And you can get yourself into that kind of upward spiral where, you know, success breeds success. But as much as I love helping the leadership teams sort of get to that kind of confident, energized, emotional state where confidence is high, what is often underappreciated is what this actually means for other employees across and further down the org chart. I think we all want to work for a company that knows where it's going, can articulate that, and is obviously immeasurably going towards that kind of future point that they're aiming for. And I can see where I fit inside this organization. I can see that I am going to thrive here. And I believe that the company is going to grow and develop. And therefore, alongside that, I can grow and develop. So even if it's sitting there today and you're plateaued growth, you're not hiring at the moment, and you might be losing some key staff, if you can press reboot on your strategy, you can engage with your talent inside the business. You can start to be able to formulate and articulate your strategy, and then you can go to the organization and launch this strategy and give them a reason to believe. Then what feels like a flatlining company or a company that's in a downward spiral can then transition to being an upward spiral. But I think it starts with changing the narrative. It starts with being able to give people the plan, having a plan that you believe in, and that's infectious by itself, and then bringing people along for the ride. And I think every employee deserves to work for a company that has a plan to win.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I know I've been there as an employee where sometimes you can get really engaged in your work in your little silo in your little pocket, and you can enjoy yourself like that for a while, especially if it's a good team and you're doing something kind of technically exciting. But it's so much nicer when you can see, okay, there's a bigger picture than what my team's working on.
Yeah.
I can see how this fits into what we're trying to achieve as an organization. I can see, I've heard the leaders talk about our strategy, and I can see the journey we've made over the last 6 months. I could see that some of the challenges they articulated, yeah, they were hard, but we got over them. And, going back to my metrics, I can also see the numbers moving.
Yeah.
I can see how this all fits together. It's massive. And I think if you look at engagement levels, which is a thing that leaders, C-suites, managers worry about the world over, this is a huge part of it. This kind of feeling of belonging to something, a bit bigger than just the work we're working on is massive. It's, I think we're seeing more and more. I think there was an article today I saw talking about this sense of belonging being much more critical to our comfort in an organization, and strategy is a big part of that. And I think the strategic journey, not just someone told me something 6 months ago and we haven't referred to it since, where that, this idea that the strategy is helping me to decide what to do next.
Yeah.
I don't need, you talked about leaders being more effective, and that's because I can answer questions myself. I don't need to come to you and say, what does this mean? What does that mean? You're there. You've laid that context out in a strategic narrative. Yeah.
Which makes me think of the traits of a non-strategic company. So things like erratic growth and sometimes not hitting your numbers. Having lots of ideas, starting lots, but not completing lots. People being given different directions or misdirection frequently, depending on what somebody's read, a podcast that they've listened to, or the flavor of the month. There are lots of characteristics that are pretty well described out there of a non-strategic company. And I think, again, if you look at the kind of the lower denominators or the newbies into a company, or junior people, or people who are sort of on that career path and evolving, an erratic leadership that's not strategic, that keeps changing their mind, changing direction, has different views of the people that they're trying to serve, doesn't have any real clarity, that can be a bit of a nightmare to be around.
Yeah. I think we all know that pivoting is powerful, and pivoting at the right time is crucial. But there's a big difference between pivots around key parts of our strategy, maybe parts of the crux that we make mindfully, and to some degree may have even seen coming, and this kind of knee-jerk stuff that some organizations find themselves getting involved with. And that's, I think we all know which one of those we'd rather be in. But there's this other concept which I think is related, which is where you have this like shadow strategy. I don't know if you've heard the term, where maybe the leaders talk about something. It isn't something we talk about repeatedly and frequently, but what we've also got is this idea of pet projects springing up. So when you talk to someone and say, okay, are you working on the top priority, and you fully expect, no, I'm doing other stuff. And it's this idea of some people in an organization don't have confidence in the strategy or don't buy into it. It isn't something that we all feel part of, and they build this shadow strategy where pet projects exist. And I must admit, earlier on in my career, there were a lot of those kind of projects around. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen that kind of thing as well.
Absolutely. I think we all have biases, and we all can behave irrationally. And if the organization we exist within allows those pet projects to start and be continued to be work on, why wouldn't you? Because that's fun, right? But it doesn't mean actually it's the right thing for you, your team, or the business. So I think that's just about, again, capabilities, management systems, processes. This is just about being a grown-up business that stops that kind of stuff from happening. So I'm going to put us both on the spot, if that's okay. If we had 3 pieces of advice, and this is unprepared, to give people in with regards to strategy, what would your 3 be? And I'm going to let you go first, so you can probably take the things out of my head off the table. That also gives me time to think.
Okay, so yeah, if I think of kind of the three critical things, I mean, the first obvious one is have a strategy. Be mindful about it, and try and write it. What I mean by that is try and write it as a story. I love the idea of a narrative. Think about where you're going to be in your time frame. It could be 2 to 3 years. Think about what the ending was like and the journey you took to get there, because it's powerful because it opens your mind. And it's powerful because when you finished it, people buy into a story. I hear a lot recently about leaders being storytellers. Great example of that. Second bit, I would say it's always going to be for me is metrics. Connect that narrative to a data model of what you're trying to achieve, and that to me is absolutely crucial. And the third thing is, again, one of my favorite topics is make sure you're saying no to stuff. You will have more ideas than you can possibly run with. Be very, very explicit and intentional about just saying no. Those are my three. How about yours?
Okay, so I think it's easier than people think, and that you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a strategic old hand to come up with a good strategy. So I think it's more accessible than people think. We don't have to use as much jargon as people tend to use. You can be an amateur and do strategy well. So and I think what you do need is a easy to follow process, and you need the ability to have really high quality, robust conversations, both across your leadership team and further down in the org to access information. So I think it's not as scary or as difficult as people think, as long as we are able to communicate effectively. My next piece of advice would be spend way more time talking about your customers, the very specific niche that you're targeting, and the value that you propose to create that is better and different to your competitors and unique to you. That the longer you can orientate yourself around that, the better, and the more you know around that, the better. And then I think this idea then can transition to the real sort of nub of what we're trying to do is we don't want to just compete. We want to be the best at something and win. And if we know what we're trying to win, and we can use that, even that language changes how we think. Because at the end of the day, there's going to be a scoreboard. You're going to have metrics. You're going to have budgets, forecasts, shareholders, etc. And we have to win something in order to be around in 3, 5, 10 years. The chances of us not being around and being marginalized or outmaneuvered or redundant if we're not on the offensive is hugely increased. So I think this is an accessible skill. It needs to be broken away or detached from the annual ritual. It needs to be made accessible to more people. We need to be better storytellers. We need to be sort of metric enabled, and we do need delivery frameworks like OKRs to support all of us to do that. And from there, your confidence in growth, accelerated growth, even market dominance can be greatly increased, which I realized as I said all of that, I gave you 3 and then added 7 more. So
great technique. Well, I usually go the other way.
Probably, a passionate wrap up there.
That was pretty good. Yeah, I usually go the other way. I say if I tell someone I've got 3 things that I need to tell them, I always forget the third. So you went the other way, which is great. And what about, okay, final question is, how are we going to help? What are we going to do if you're an organization who realizes there's opportunity to improve your strategic approach? Why would they turn to us?
I think they would turn to us because 1, experience, but 2, in the same way, I think it's to do with kind of philosophically where we are as an organization and what guides us, which is wherever your starting point is, that's okay with us. We'll get under the skin of where you are, who your customers are, who your people are, what are the characters that in play here? How much money do you have? What capabilities do you have? Who are your competitors? And all of those type of things. We don't mind, actually. what we really want to do is wrap whatever we can do around you, and together we will embark on a journey that we talk a lot about maturity, whether that's strategic maturity, metric maturity, OKR maturity. We want to go on that journey with you, and we have piggybacked on many decades of cumulative experience. We have done hundreds and hundreds of implementations. We have gathered an enormous amount of experience around this. We also get to see organizations that thrive as a result of having these capabilities inside them, and we like sharing those with our customers to increase the probability of them succeeding, as opposed to making it up themselves and hoping that they can upskill it. And potentially people can, but the risk profile on that is higher than passionate. I mean, I would call us passionate experts. That if anything, if we have one Achilles heel, we get over invested in our customers. We really care. It's not just about what we know. We really care. And we don't come at this with a cookie cutter. We come at this with a view of who are you and what are we dealing with here? And then we can apply to that this idea of, I think you and I both openly say we're incredibly bad losers. And we like our customers to win. That's what matters most to us. And we have, one of the things we set up front inside a project is, what does winning look like? How would we know we've helped you be successful?
Yeah, great. Yeah, absolutely. Love all that. And the thing that I really hone in on there is this: it isn't a cookie cutter. We have had lots of success throughout our career, but no two of them were the same. We couldn't take a blueprint from customer A and apply that at customer B. Just that's not the way the world works. But what we do is the learning and the nuance of customer A helps us solve the challenges at customer B. And that's, I think, not a cookie cutter. Absolutely spot on.
Again, it went longer than we always think it should or could. But I think if I was listening to that, I would hope that you've gathered some knowledge from that, and you've learned a bit more about strategic planning, how it sort of applies to your org, and perhaps you've learned a little bit more about us as well. Thanks again, Ian, and talk again soon.
Thanks, Matt.